ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the 413 Productions YouTube channel. We've got a very special episode with you for you today. I'm here with the two most influential people. Two? Give me two.
Oh, two.
Two most influential people in my life.
Teamwork here.
Teamwork makes the dream work. The two most influential people in my life. Y'all are in for a great treat. That's Randy Newberry, my father. This is Jan Newberry, my mother. And we're going to talk today about stuff that's happened. So some of y'all may be wondering, hey, that's a great Photoshop that you've done with his hands, being gone like that and everything. I assure you it's not Photoshop. So my parents can tell the story better because I was so small. They can tell the story better about what happened. So we're going to dive right into it here. So y'all were missionaries in Brazil. And go ahead and why don't you tell us about how that came about to be.
Well, I was the youth minister here in Forney at First Baptist Church, and had some young people that were interested in missions. And the state convention had a missions opportunity weekend for teenagers, and so we took several of those kids, young people, to that weekend. And God really spoke to us during that weekend. And we came back from that weekend and we began to sense that God was calling us to the mission field. So we prayed and sought God's leadership in that and sensed God's call. We made a commitment to that. But then we had to decide where God was calling us, not just to the mission field, but what country, where to serve. And so it took a long time of praying through that and seeking God and finding that exact place that God wanted us. And it turned out it was Brazil, specifically northeast Brazil. And so we went to Brazil. First, we had to go to South Brazil for language school to learn to speak Portuguese because that's the language of Brazil. And it was a year-long process of learning a new language, a new culture, but it was a great experience of learning. Now, we made a lot of mistakes, or maybe I should say I made a lot of mistakes with the language, but we survived. We learned.
It's what happens when you're learning something new, right? Of course you're going to make mistakes.
Right.
You just hope it's not it's just a foot in your mouth instead of falling flat on your face.
Yeah.
Well, so after y'all moved to Brazil, y'all determined that y'all were unhappy with your current situation, children-wise, and you weren't happy with the way that they had behaved. They just wanted something new. So y'all went ahead and made the decision to.
Well, we had lived in Natal about 6 months, been in Brazil for about a year and a half total, when Philip was born.
Well, we had two children, and they were 13 and 11 when Philip was born. And we began to calculate how young we would be when they were through with high school and coming back to the States for college, and we would have that empty nest. And we thought we'd be too young for the empty nest. So that was the decision that brought us to have a third child.
Little did they know how much of a handful it was going to be.
Yes, I'm not sure God intends for us to have teenagers and toddlers in the same house, but we did. So Philip was born in Natal. When he was about almost a year old, no, he was a year and a half old, we came home to the States for furlough. That's where missionaries come to reconnect with family, to tell churches about the work that is going on the mission field. So we came home when Philip was about a year and a half old. We came home to Texas, and we had been here for a little while when we went to Richmond, Virginia for a furloughing missionary conference.
There were about 140 missionaries at that conference. So it was a large conference, but we learned a lot about missions and
they weren't just from Brazil; they were from all
over the world.
Right.
And we shared about our work; they shared about theirs. We learned a lot about what God was doing, literally around the world, at that conference.
And we had been there for the conference was Monday through Friday. Well, on Thursday morning, Philip got up and he was sick. Just a virus kind of thing. So I kept him home.
It wasn't. It wasn't COVID.
It wasn't COVID back then. No, it wasn't COVID. I kept him home, but throughout the day, I could tell that this wasn't just a virus. This was something that he needed to see a doctor for this. So at that point, we went to the hospital.
Well, I came home that afternoon after the meetings, and Philip was asleep, and Jan said, "You can wake him up, but something's wrong." And so I woke him up, and it was kind of like, lights are on, but nobody's home. He would open his eyes, but he wasn't there.
I still do that kind of too.
So the first hospital we went to, they determined that he had meningitis. We didn't stay at that hospital because they weren't equipped to take care of him. We went to another one. We spent the night at another hospital. And then the next morning, he had continued to worsen through the night. So the next morning, we went to Medical College of Virginia Hospital, where there was a pediatric ICU where he could get the best care.
I'll never forget that second hospital when they actually diagnosed the meningitis, and the doctor said, now it's going to be touch and go for the next 24 to 48 hours. And I thought, now wait a minute, this is America. What do you mean touch and go? And he said, well, you just don't understand how serious this illness is. And then, like she said, the next morning we had to transfer to the big hospital because you had gotten a lot worse.
So that was on Friday morning, and this was actually Good Friday. This was Easter weekend.
Yes.
So things continued getting worse all weekend, and so by Sunday morning, Easter Sunday morning, the doctors had said that he would not survive the day. They'd never seen a child that sick survive. So we should just spend as much time with him as we could throughout the day because it would be his last day. So that's what we did.
And I thought it was interesting that always in the past with our children, when they would have to get stitches or a broken arm or something like that, I had to stay with them because she couldn't.
Right.
She just couldn't stay in there with them. But when you were sick that weekend, I couldn't stay in there. But she wouldn't leave you.
That's right.
She wouldn't leave your side. But I would go in and just be overcome with emotions, and I couldn't handle it. I stood beside your bed. You had 9 IV pumps going, pumping life support into you. You're on a respirator doing the breathing for you. Your lungs had ruptured and it inflated your body. The respirator had inflated your body, and your arms and legs had no blood flow, so they had just turned literally black like shoe leather. And I stood there beside your bed and I said, God, I don't understand. We've given up our home, our culture, our country, our family, our language. We've moved to another country and to serve you. And how can this happen to our child? And I said, they're saying that he's going to die today. God, please don't let my son die. And God very clearly spoke to me as I stood there beside your bed. God said, I let my son die. I let my son die for you, and you didn't even care. And I began to realize at that point how much God must love us, because I didn't want you to die for anything, but God let his son die for us.
It's very eye-opening, right?
Yes.
To really give you you got a front row seat to just how expansive his love is.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
Right. I think we need to back up here, though, because we are talking about why you don't have your limbs, and we haven't said exactly what was going on with the meningitis that caused that. A rare complication of meningitis that doesn't normally occur, or when it does occur, that's when the child does not survive. It's where the body shuts down the blood supply to the extremities to save the oxygen for the vital organs. And that's what had happened to him. He had no blood flow to his hands and feet, and the doctors thought probably to his brain too. But we're still thinking
We're still
it.
wondering about that.
It didn't affect my brain too much, did it?
Right. But that's why he didn't have blood flow to his hands and feet. That is actually what caused the gangrene that caused the amputations to be necessary.
And you don't typically hear about this because typically the survival rate is, well,
right,
almost none.
Exactly, almost none. That's right.
But I survived.
He did survive, and I do remember that on the Monday morning we went to. Randy and I were sleeping on couches in the waiting room at the hospital on that Easter Sunday night, and I remember waking up on Monday morning, and I woke him up and I said, "Nobody came to get us in the night," and the thoughts going through my mind were, the nurses would have come to get us if he had died, so he must still be alive. And that was a turning point. The nurses told us later that the pediatrician that was on call that night had stayed with Philip all night long, trying things, just doing everything that he could. And we know that that doctor gave him the best treatment possible, but we also know that the healing actually came from God.
And you know, when you say healing, having amputations and losing limbs is not typically a way that you would view, you know, that's not healing, is it? But it is, because God knew what he was doing.
Our thoughts are not God's thoughts.
No.
Exactly. When I prayed for healing, I prayed for healing for your entire body.
Entire healing.
Exactly. That the blood would go back into those hands and feet, and those dead limbs would be made live again. They would be resurrected. But that was not what happened. But you were healed because you are healthy.
Yes. Survival is healing. So when the amputations had to be done, now that was the transferring to a different hospital again.
Well, before the amputations were done, you were still in the pediatric ICU, but Medical College of Virginia is a medical school, and the doctors were always bringing residents, interns in and explaining your case. And so one day, the doctor that when they first diagnosed you on that Easter Sunday morning when they said you were going to die that day, I told the doctor, I said, I don't believe he's going to die because there's people all around the world praying for him. Because you see, those 140 missionaries that were there at that conference, they went back to their furloughing homes and churches
here in the States
and told them to pray for you, but then they contacted their mission fields and told them to pray for you, and so word literally went around the world to have prayer for you. And I told that doctor, I said, I don't believe he's going to die because there's people all over the world praying for him. The doctor laughed in my face and said, well, you just don't know how sick your son is. And I wanted to say it, but I didn't say it out loud because I didn't want to offend the doctor. I wanted to say, but you don't know how great my God is. And so 3 weeks later, that doctor has a group of interns in your room, and he's going over your case, that the fact that you really shouldn't be here by that point, but you survived. And he was explaining everything, and one of the interns said, well, it sounds like a miracle to me. And that doctor that laughed in my face said, well, what do you expect when half the world is praying for him? So God gets the glory.
Hashtag truth.
Yes. God gets the glory.
Yes, true. He does.
That's true. Another way that God gets the glory is, there were a lot of times that I didn't really feel God's love. When we go through tough times, it's like, okay, God, if you really love us like you say you do, why is all this happening? And I remember one of those days I was feeling like that and just, praying and just saying, God, I just don't really feel your love today. And he told me, he said, well, just look around. And I thought about what was going on. There were people coming, just every hour of the day to visit us there at the hospital. There were ladies, especially in Richmond, there were the ladies who worked at the International Mission Board. They decided that we should be tired of hospital food by that time. And so every day for lunch, a different lady came, brought a home-cooked lunch, not, go by and pick up something, but they brought a home-cooked lunch for us so that we didn't have to eat hospital food, just things like that. But just the fact, God told me, he said, that's my love right there. That's my love right there. These people coming, these people loving you, these people doing things for you. And so I think about that. I pray and say, I want to be just a channel for God to love people through me, and that's ways that I can do it.
See, you don't really remember each and every person's name or their face of
I
who
don't
did that,
remember their
but you
names.
remember that they did that because God used them to minister to you.
That's
And
exactly right.
That's how we need to be.
You're right. I remember the way they made me feel. That's what the old saying is. Yes.
Another example of how they cared. We were staying at the Missionary Learning Center, which is about 30 to 45 minutes right outside of Richmond. So we had to drive in every day from there to the hospital. And of course, we didn't have a car there. And some missionaries were helping us and taking us and everything. And one evening, there were several missionaries that came to the hospital to visit us. And Dr. Keith Parks, who was the president of the International Mission Board.
President. Head guy.
He and his wife were there. Mm-hmm. And after we visited and everything, he reached in his pocket and pulled out his car keys and he said, I'm going to Africa tomorrow to visit some missionaries. I want you to drive my car while I'm gone. And so for that whole week while he was in Africa, we drove the president's car. Now that's just because they loved us and cared about us.
That's right.
And they knew that we were going through a very difficult time. And here, we're peon missionaries and he's the president, but he cared. Mm-hmm. And he ministered to us, and it meant a lot to us.
That sounds of a great leader.
Yes.
Is to do things like that.
Exactly.
So then the amputations had to occur.
Well, they told us that where you do the amputations needs to be where you do the rehab. And we said, well, look, we need to go back to Texas.
Take me back to Texas.
Be
Yes.
close to home, close to family and everything to do the rehab because we knew that would be a longer process.
Closer to God in Texas.
So the doctor got on the phone and he called a hospital in Texas and arranged everything for them for the Children's Medical Center in Dallas to admit you, and then the surgeons from the Scottish Rite Hospital in Dallas to come over and to do the amputations, and they even arranged for a medical plane to fly you and your mother back to Texas. Only one parent could go, so I had to fly commercial, but she stayed with you the whole time, and so you were in Children's Medical Center, but the surgeons, the doctors from Scottish Rite Hospital came over and did the surgery.
Before they could do the surgery, though, you started getting really sick again. We couldn't figure out what was happening, and you are allergic to penicillin.
We found that out the hard way.
Actually, no, I'm wrong about this. I was thinking this was before the
was
amputations, right? But this was after the amputations. So I don't know if I should tell this story now or later.
We'll come back and revisit that.
We'll come back and revisit this because it was after the amputations. The old brain is kicking in.
Well, I remember the day of the surgery was April the 29th, and they were coming that morning. It was scheduled that morning, and I was praying that morning, and I said, God, if you don't hurry up and heal those hands and feet, they're going to come take him to surgery and cut him off. And just a few minutes later, the nurse came with a little red wagon, and she said, we'll give him a ride in this wagon. And you had been very agitated, even in Richmond. After you started improving and surviving, you were really agitated about everything. Nothing, you weren't talking or anything, but you were just agitated, not comfortable with anything. And so she comes to get you to ride the little red wagon, and she said, now, you can carry him if you want to. And when I picked you up, you laid your head on my shoulder. And this incredible calm and peace came over us. It's like God just put us in a bubble, and I carried you down to the operating room. And I'll never forget standing at the door of that operating room, and I had to hand you over to her. That's probably one of the hardest things I've ever had to do in my life.
Because, that morning we had prayed, okay, God, this is it. Like he didn't know Like if you don't heal those today in life, if you don't resurrect them today, this is it.
There's only one way to heal.
Minute. This is it. Yes, and
he was cutting it close.
And yeah.
Well, so, God told us. He said, "Just trust me. I'm going to get more glory through Philip's life this way. You can trust me." And that's and we've had to rely on that for a long time.
That's an incredible amount of faith for a long duration as well.
Yes. Because we can say why all day long, and we're not going to understand why. But he says we don't have to understand why. We just have to trust him.
Have to trust him.
And we did best we could at that time. And
so they did all the amputations all at once.
Well, yeah,
all in one surgery.
We had a crowd of people there for that surgery. In fact, the hospital had to give us a separate room because there were so many people.
A big posse
came to support us during that time.
And that's one reason we needed to be at home, to have that support.
Yes. So they did all the amputations all in one sitting.
They did, actually.
All four at one time.
I don't remember, 4 doctors maybe came and did it.
Yes,
I think there was a doctor working on every limb.
Yes.
And the hospitals worked together because, like Randy said before, you were in Children's Hospital because you were very sick. But the surgeons were from Scottish Rite Hospital because that's the hospital that would take care of your prosthetic care, and they did the amputations actually. So after the surgery, they came, how they do. They come and say, okay, surgery's finished. You can come see him in just a little bit. And we went in there, and it was, I'll never forget, I knew what was going to happen. I knew the reason you were in surgery. But still, I'll never forget pulling that cover back, and there were, the feet were gone, the hands were gone. They really did what they said they were going to do. And that's another time that, you want to say why, but you just trust. You just trust. And you know that God's going to get you through it. And that's a time I can look back. When things happen now, it's like, okay, if he got me through that, he's going to get me through anything.
But, as it turns out, we weren't out of the woods quite yet.
Oh, well, after, now here's my story that I was going to tell before.
Well,
since I didn't have hands,
the amputations, they didn't, I thought in my mind they would just cut it off and sew it up. But in order to conserve as much length as possible, they cut it and then they put wire sutures in, and every day they would come in and they would twist on those like a twist tie on a bread wrapper, and it would pull the skin down. And once it got down to the size of a quarter, that open wound, once it got down to the size of a quarter, they could do skin graft. But right after that surgery, you have 4 amputations that are open wounds.
Yes. So they gave him antibiotics, of course. Well, he was allergic to penicillin. They knew that. And so when we went into the hospital, you know how they have the wristband that they put on you for all allergies or whatever. Well, he had one of those. After the amputations, they put it, actually, I guess when he went down for the amputations, they put the wristband, they taped it on the bed. So he goes to surgery, he comes back from surgery, and guess what?
On a different bed.
He came back on a different bed. So he didn't have anything, and somehow somebody missed it in his chart that he was allergic to penicillin. So he had started to get, all these problems. He was really just kind of sick, and they couldn't figure out what was going on. And one day, I heard the nurse say, as she puts all these like shots into the tubes
IVs,
there that's going into him, and she says, well, this is the last dose of penicillin he's going to get. And I'm like, what? He's having penicillin? Maybe this is what's wrong with him.
Maybe so, right?
Maybe so. But in Philip fashion, he didn't just do the allergy, a little rash here and there, a little cough, something like that. He actually developed Stevens-Johnson syndrome, which, who's ever heard of that? Probably somebody that's had it, but we definitely had never heard of it. And what happens is it causes the body to reject the skin. You don't just get a rash on your skin. Your skin literally falls off of your body.
I remember helping the nurse turn him over one day, and after we got him turned over, my hands were covered in his skin. It just literally fell off.
Right, and Children's Hospital is next door to Parkland Hospital in Dallas. And Parkland Hospital has the burn center, or at least at that time it did, the burn center for the Metroplex. So they treated your body like burns. It was like you were a burn victim. Every day they would take you in a little red wagon from Children's over to Parkland for water therapy for the burns, which was very painful. You were sedated a lot of that time. And so that was another hurdle back in ICU with them saying, we're not sure he's going to make it even through all this.
Those baths would wash away the dead skin, and then they would put pig skin over where the skin came off.
Maybe that's why I like football so much.
Maybe so.
Absolutely.
You were a football.
Yeah. So that way it would try to help protect your body and everything where the skin had come off.
I remember the doctor sitting down with us. I guess it was when they had put Philip in ICU when all this was going on, and he said, sometimes medical science just does more than God plans for us to do, because he thought again that you wouldn't survive.
Another weekend.
Mm-hmm. And another weekend, that's right. Mm-hmm. But come Monday morning, you were still there.
God had a different plan.
God had a different plan.
Medical science does not outrun God.
No.
Never.
That's true.
Cannot happen. Nothing we can do can.
That's true. But I will say that when you were in the hospital back in Richmond, and you were so sick and on the ventilator and all that, they did have you sedated all the time. And that was for about 3 weeks. And then whenever you began to wake up, there was, at first you were blind and deaf. Yeah. The sight came back pretty quickly, but it took a while for the hearing to come back, and actually...
I'm still deaf in this ear, my left ear, and my wife says I'm also deaf in this ear. Huh?
Selective hearing in this ear.
What? Well, God had the opportunity multiple times to minister in His own way to people. People got to see the miracle that He performed, over and over again. It wasn't just at one hospital in Virginia. It wasn't just at one hospital in Dallas. It wasn't. Then he moved it over to Parkland. So he was expanding His ability to get glory on that, so it would touch and reach that many more people.
Yes.
And then once you survive the Stevens-Johnson syndrome and begin to recover from that, then we needed to transfer from Children's Medical Center over to Scottish Rite Hospital. Because they're the ones that did the amputations, and they knew how to care for you further, and probably would have gone there sooner if it hadn't been for the Stevens-Johnson syndrome. But then you go over there, and you're there recuperating for about a month, and then we got to go home. Got to take you home. And
for about a month.
Finally, going home, right?
Going home. And then after that month at home, we went back to start prosthetic fittings for your legs.
For my wooden leg.
Before we transferred, there's one story that I want to tell. You would look at us when we would talk to you, and we knew you were hearing us, but you never would respond. You never would say anything or smile or do anything. And I remember one morning, one day, I don't remember what time of day it was, but I think your mother was feeding you a popsicle.
I like popsicles.
Right.
And you smiled.
Right.
The first time you had smiled since you got sick.
Right.
After all this time, You smiled.
I still smile when I eat a popsicle.
And she ran up and down the hallway of that hospital telling people, he smiled.
They were looking at her like a crazy person.
It was so exciting to get a response, you know,
right.
to know that you responded to something.
People are like, yeah, crazy lady, whatever.
But it was a great day.
Yes.
To know that you had responded to what she was. I think she was singing to you.
Probably
and
so.
And you smiled.
And anybody would laugh at that.
So then we
go to Scottish Rite.
Then we begin getting fitted for prosthetics.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So what happened there?
Well, they started to fit you, but usually whenever you start walking with prosthesis, you need some help, like crutches. Well, you know, crutches are a little hard to handle if you don't have hands.
Well, before they even started trying to walk, they had this standing box. And it's just a wooden box where you could stand in it, but you couldn't sit down. You couldn't squat or anything. You had to stand. And there was a table top to part of it where you could play with toys and everything, but you had to stand up.
Right.
And that was getting your legs used to wearing the prosthesis. And so that way, because you're going to have them on for a long time, so you had to get used to wearing those. And
I bet I hated that standing box, didn't I?
So, no, you didn't act like you hated it at all. You were just busy playing with the little toys.
Good.
And then...
And then, you know, after he stands for a while, then they're going to start you walking, and they're trying to figure out, okay, how are we going to do this? In fact, they made a little walker for you where they, you know, because they figured out right away, okay, crutches are not going to work, so let's do this little walker.
What was the first clue?
What was the first clue? They're smart people.
It was a ring walker. It was like you were in a ring that had wheels around you, and you could walk and just kind of push that along, and you could hold on to it. So, and it worked.
But actually,
But you didn't need it.
You didn't need it. Actually, they take you out of the standing box, put you in that little ring walker, you try it out, they put you back out of it to, I don't know, I guess put you back in the standing box, and you take off walking. So, you know.
I haven't stopped since.
Haven't stopped since.
They said, now, our goal tomorrow is for Philip to walk with crutches. And we're like, well, how's he going to handle crutches?
That's a crazy goal.
And they said, well, we put little tubes on there where he can put his arms in and hold them. And so they took the prosthesis that day for that overnight and made some adjustments and brought them in the next morning and put them on, stood you up to see if you could stand in it. And when you stood up, you just started walking. Never once used a crutch.
Haven't needed it.
That's just God.
That is. That's God saying, look, this is how I'm working. This is what I'm doing. And it's confirmation to you. I do know what I'm doing. See?
So they worked with you, occupational therapy worked with you on how to do things with your hands or your lack of hands and how to eat and all of that stuff. And you know, all the things that they tried and the things we thought would work and everything, you didn't do any of them. You just figured it out on your own.
Right.
Kind of still do.
You make it work.
Right. So by this time, it's our furlough's over. It's time for us to go back to Brazil. So we had to make a choice, you know, is that what we're going to do? And we said, yes, that's what we're going to do.
So, back to Brazil. Flying back around the globe.
That's right, back to Brazil.
But we didn't go back to Natal.
No, we went back to the city of São Paulo. São Paulo is probably the most well-developed city in Brazil. And so for any prosthetic care, for any medical care, it would be the best place to be. So we went there, and we did check out their
hospital
medical care. We didn't have to check out any prosthetic stuff there, but we did. The way your prosthesis fit on was they were strapped onto you. And so one day you were out in the driveway, didn't really have much yard, but you were out in the driveway kicking a soccer ball, just like every other little
Brazilian
2-year-old in Brazil. That's exactly right. And as you kicked the ball, you fell. And something had to give. The prosthesis was strapped to your body so tightly that it did not give, so your bone did. And so you broke your leg. Not the prosthesis, but you broke your real leg.
The real leg, yeah.
The real leg, yes. But you did get very good care there.
But you had to be in a cast up to here.
Yeah,
I mean, up to your chest, a body cast.
Yeah.
So that was not an easy time.
No, that wasn't an easy time.
It doesn't sound fun.
No, it wasn't much fun. After a year, we came back to the States for you to have, not for furlough this time, just for a medical checkup for you. And
new prosthesis.
And not new prosthesis, because you'd grown. As kids grow, they have to have the prosthetics changed very often. So, in talking with your doctors, we knew that you could get much better care here. For one thing, you wouldn't have to have prosthesis that's strapped on that did not give if you fell.
No more broken bones. At least from that.
Yes, not from that. So we felt like God was just telling us that's what we needed to do.
And so, y'all moved back here to the States.
So we moved back to the States.
Thank you for moving back here to the States for my the best medical care for me. And so then, been here ever since.
And life was always a challenge to figure out how you do things. And you figured out how to do everything. Riding a bicycle and rollerblading. I never forget you rollerblading in the church parking lot where I was pastor. Mm-hmm. And a salesman drives up and parks his car and gets out, and you skate over by him and fell down. He said something to you. I couldn't hear it, but I could see it through the window. And after he left, you came in, and I said, "So what did that guy, that salesman say to you?" And you said, he asked me if I needed a hand, and I said, "No, I need two."
Hey,
he didn't know how to respond to that.
I do. I still do. Hey, come back, salesman guy. I need some.
I think one of the greatest experiences was watching you play soccer on the YMCA soccer team.
In Hazel.
Playing football.
Shout out, Hazel.
And occasionally you would kick the ball so hard, you would kick the prosthesis off, because by now you're wearing prosthesis that don't have to be strapped on.
Right.
And you would kick the ball so hard you'd kick your prosthesis off, and the other team would see this leg come flying in there, and they would freeze. They don't know what to do.
A bunch of 8 and 9-year-olds running around, and this guy kicks his leg off, and they're like, "Whoa."
So your team called that goal time.
Goal time.
They would get the ball to go score while you were putting your prosthesis back on, and the other team's watching.
Yep.
So they knew they could score then. Life was always interesting.
Life was always interesting. See, I still like to make it interesting.
It still is.
Well, I want to say thank you for sharing all this. I could have told this, but you know what? Because I've heard them talk about this before, but it's better when you get it right from the source and everything, right? And just the tremendous amount of faith that my parents have shown, and the kind of faith that they've taught me. I can't even put it into words. It's such a blessing for me, and I just want to thank y'all for teaching me faith, teaching me about the Lord, and being great parents. So, #great parents. Thanks for watching, everybody. Make sure that you follow us on Facebook, 413productions.us, on Instagram and TikTok at No Hands Newberry, the website, 413productions.us, and of course, click the subscribe, like, follow. I'm trying to point to all the things that are below it here, wherever they are. Like, subscribe, notifications, all that good stuff.
Or you could do old school and come by and knock on our door, and we'd be glad to have you come in and sit down with us.
You could do that, yes, I suppose. Yes, call and make an appointment. Thank you very much, everybody, and y'all have a great day.